Germany, where Luxembourg, the Jewess, was in control. She was shot by the remains of the German army, and this is one of the reasons that Hitler detested the Jews, because he blamed all Jews, because he knew what was happening in Russia and Hungary and in his own country, Austria and Germany. But here we see in England, on another front, the Jewish banker Cassel finances the economic education. The Jewish millionaire banker Sir Ernest Cassel paid the money for the building of the London School of Economics. And here we see a glass-stained window at the London School of Economics. And here it is, we see a wolf in a sheep's clothing there as their emblem. What does that mean? It's called the Fabian Society, where the Fabian socialists are taking the world. You can see these ones with sledgehammers are recreating the world according to their utopian state. And it's called the Fabian Society because Fabian was a Roman general who never took a city in a frontal attack. He always took them very slowly by starving them out by water, restricting the water or the food supply, so he took them indirectly. And the Fabian socialists are taking us over indirectly as well. So there's no real difference between a communist state or us being run by 200 big multinationals. So let's go on. Here we see one of the Fabian socialists was John Maynard Keynes, and he suggested that we get out of the depression which was caused by taking money out of circulation by printing more money or getting it from the bankers. And that was all right, but it put us further into debt. Every time we borrowed $1 million from the bankers, we could spend it, and it made the goods go round, but there was a shadow of debt attached to it, which they had to pay the interest on the next year out of their taxation. So really it was like eating your arm when you were hungry. It tasted okay, but after you'd eaten it, you never had it again. And inflation was actually caused. Then we had the Roaring 20. Remember, the Federal Reserve Bank was put into operation in America in 1914, and from that central point, which was one of Karl Marx's 10 points to socialize the West, we saw the bankers deliberately expand credit by putting plenty of easy money in society at low interest rates. The economy predictably boomed, and during the boom, all the businesses went into hock to the banks in order to put their property up as collateral to the banks in order to expand to keep up with the boom. But the bankers knew that the fish was on the hook then, because all the bankers took all the property as collateral. So then it was in their interest to call. We had the boom of the 20s, and then we had the Wall Street crash, and all the businesses fell into the bankers' hands. And we saw soup kitchens again, unemployment lines, and men in a land of plenty having very little to eat, because the money of that nation had been manipulated by international financiers on Wall Street for their own ends, so all the property of America would fall into their hands. And remember, they got them on the hook during the boom because the businesses went into hock to the bankers during the boom in order to expand their business to keep up with the growth. And then when the depression came, the bankers knocked on the door and took over their assets. Okay. Then we see the dole lines and social unrest and cars sold very cheaply, people jumping out of skyscrapers, and the reaction to this social unrest in Europe raised Mussolini, the Catholic boy, took over in Italy. And of course, he banned Freemasonry. The first thing he did, he abolished Freemasonry, and Hitler also abolished Freemasonry in Germany. And then we see the Spanish Civil War took place. There we see the Catholic priests were fighting to get law and order back from what many believed the Jewish bankers were financing the Spanish government, which was democratically elected. And we saw the law and order return to Spain after the Civil War, where the church got back on control. And here we see the Windsors meeting Adolf Hitler. He resigned his crown of England for what they said, Mr. Simpson, but there was more to it than that. He knew that things behind the scenes, he didn't want to spend his life as a puppet controlled by international financiers who were working against the interest of the people. He went to Wales once during the Depression, and they'd whitewashed all the walls where Edward VIII was to walk down, and he wasn't meant to go off it. But being the man he was, he walked up a grubby side alley and said, "I want to see the people as they are." And he knocked on a door, and an old lady came to the door, and there was the King of England. And he said, "Can I come in for a cup of tea?" And she said, "I haven't got any food in the house." Why? Because the bankers had restricted the food supply. But you notice there were plenty of money about when wars are to be fought. But they were starving the people. So when I often wondered why why he was anti-Semitic, as they say. I always asked questions at school and never got a satisfactory answer. But there was a reason why Hitler was anti-Semitic, because he knew what the international Jewish bankers were doing. He knew that they were causing the revolution in Russia and in Germany and all the other European nations. And here the Catholic priests saw Hitler as God's providence. God's holy providence has provided that in a decisive hour he, Hitler, be entrusted with the leadership of the German people. There is the old church swastika, as we saw last night. Now we see the teeming million of Germany's troops are now armed to fight against Bolshevism and the Jewish money power. Catholic paper claims Hitler or Nazi movement would save humanity from the Jews. The Nazi movement for freeing the world from the Jews is a movement for the renaissance of human dignity. The all-wise and almighty God is behind this movement. Father Franjo Prelic in Zagreb, Catholic newspaper, 1941. So there was a reaction. Nazism was a reaction where the church got on the bandwagon, saw the obvious evils of Freemasonry, the Jewish money power and communism and Bolshevism, and they united. Hitler was a Catholic, and here we see him meeting one of the heads of the Catholic Church. Catholic Church unites with Catholic-controlled state to fight a common enemy, i.e. Jewish money power, communism and Freemasonry. Catholicism and Judeo-Masonry vie for world dominion. The papacy and Masonry, those are the two powers active throughout the world, and each is seeking to dominate it. Either Roman Catholicism will lift us up again to the level of Christian civilization, or else Judeo-Masonry will drag us down the path of barbarism and decadent paganism. The whole world oscillates between the two, Christendom and paganism, or what we could say Catholicism and communism, or the Jewish Freemasonic power. Here we see Hitler. Hitler claimed the Jewish financiers want another war. If the international Jewish financiers in and outside Europe should succeed in plunging the nations once more into a world war, then the result will not be the Bolshevization of the earth, and thus the victory of Jewry, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe. Adolf Hitler in the Reichstag, Berlin, January 30th, 1939. Now we see President Roosevelt. Roosevelt was surrounded by Jewish advisors. F.D. Roosevelt was such a pawn, the number of Jews among his 72 advisors was 52. There we see his remedy to the Depression was bringing in many socialistic conditions in America and destroying many freedoms. And there we see the American note, which was printed in his time with the all-seeing eye of Illuminati. Remember, creating wars, creating depressions, and always selling the remedy which put us further into their clutches. Here we see Father Coughlin, so-called. He was a Roman Catholic priest, and he wrote this book, which I have got a copy of. That's the picture of it. The Money, Questions and Answers. He shows that the Federal Reserve System that the Jewish bankers set up in 1914 and are making today billions and billions of dollars, which they use in interest and taxation from the people, that they created money out of thin air to loan the government their money when the government had the right under the Constitution to create the money itself. Well, Coughlin stirred up many Americans against the Jewish money power in Wall Street. But then the Wall Street bankers got the government to turn the tax department on the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church shrunk back very quickly. He spoke against the monopolies, the big petrol companies, the big telephone companies, the money lenders. He accused them of many things, and they were wrong. They were obvious evils. But it didn't cover the mistakes in the Catholic Church. It didn't make the Catholic Church right, because they recognised obvious evils. Here we see that God condemns monopolies. Woe unto them that join house to house and lay field to field, till there be no place that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth. Here we see the Second World War came about, as Hitler said might happen. And there's a German poster showing the Jews. You can see the nose, the Jews, and it's got England is in the grip of the Jewish money power. And that's why England didn't want to go to war with the English. But there we see the Jew resisting and the Germans trying to do something about it. General von Rundstedt, one of Germany's great generals, Hitler's orders spear British Army at Dunkirk in 1940. Marshal von Rundstedt stated his astonishment that Hitler had ordered the German army to halt before the annihilation of the British Army at Dunkirk. Von Rundstedt stated, Hitler then astonished us by speaking with admiration of the British Empire. He compared the British Empire with the Catholic Church, saying they were both essential elements of stability in the world, pawns in the game. They could have finished the British Army off at Dunkirk, but Hitler said that the British are our cousins and we want them on our side to fight against Bolshevism, a common enemy. And also with Pearl Harbor, America once again didn't want to get into the war, but they were drawn into the war because their battleships were deliberately left tied up at Pearl Harbor. And 85% of the people didn't want to go to war the day before Pearl Harbor. But the day after Pearl Harbor, 85% of American people, their public opinion had been changed. And the bankers were able to draw America into the war. The name of the game was get all the nations in fighting and killing each other, and when they were all maimed and dead, the survivors, you talk them into joining the United Nations or some power which they control, hence taking their freedoms off them. The crime at Caton Wood, here's one of the heads with a revolver shot in it. The Jewish-controlled KGB exterminated Polish army officers at Caton Wood. After the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which split Poland in two in 1940 or 39, we see that all the Polish army officers that were carted into Russia were executed. So it appears that not only did the Jews organise and carry out the Caton Wood mass murders, but that through Robert Kempner, the American public prosecutor at Nuremberg, they tried to conceal the truth from the world. Thus, in a few days, or perhaps in a few hours, they exterminated the elite, the Roman Catholics of the Polish nation, and with it, many of the intellectual class. They were all reserve officers, and the communists knew that part of the international Jewish bankers' plans was that all of Eastern Europe would go to the communists after the Second World War. And here we see that Germany was peppered into defeat. There's one of the cities of Germany completely ruined. One of the reasons for bombing these cities was it was good for the bankers to destroy them, and then the people that survived had to go into debt to them in order to rebuild the cities. Do you follow me? Keep the people in debt, keep them in agitation against each other. So as the communist forces pushed through from the east, Russia controlled and took all of Eastern Europe. We had the atom bomb, but after the war we could have said to Stalin here, we'll give you till tomorrow, Joe, to get out of Eastern Europe, or we'll drop a bomb on you. But no, they didn't, because the international bankers were ruling them all. And it was a big show in order for the